The line at the supermarket checkout counter snaked around the aisles, but Karen didn't have time for this. She glanced at her watch, her foot tapping impatiently. There was a dinner party at her house in an hour, and she needed to get home to put the finishing touches on her signature dish. "Excuse me," she said, loudly enough for the people in front of her to hear. "I'm in a bit of a hurry. Do you mind if I just slip in front of you?" The other customers turned to look at her, stunned by her brazen request. An older woman at the front of the line scowled. "The line is moving quite quickly," she replied. "I'm sure you can wait your turn like the rest of us." Karen rolled her eyes. "It's only a few people. I promise I'll be quick." She flashed a rehearsed smile, hoping her charm would get her way. "I said no," the woman responded, her voice firm. "Now please, go to the back of the line." Karen's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. How dare this woman refuse her? Didn't she know who she was? Karen was used to getting her way, and she wasn't about to let some stubborn old lady stand in her path. "This is ridiculous," she huffed, glaring at the woman. "I have things to do, and I don't have time to wait in this line. Move aside, or I'll make you move." The woman's eyes widened in shock, and the other customers began to murmur in disbelief. Karen, unfazed, stepped forward, her hand reaching out to push the woman aside. But before she could make contact, a stern voice rang out from behind her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, young lady." Karen whirled around to find a tall, imposing woman with graying hair and piercing eyes staring her down. The woman's tone was laced with authority, and Karen suddenly felt very small. "Excuse me," Karen stammered, her bravado faltering. "I said, I wouldn't do that if I were you," the woman repeated, her gaze unwavering. "This line is moving, and you would do well to wait your turn like everyone else." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the woman raised a hand, silencing her. "I'm Judge Samantha Walters, and I don't take kindly to entitled behavior. If you continue to harass these customers, I'll have no choice but to file a formal complaint against you." Karen's heart sank. Judge Walters. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had just tried to strong-arm a judge, and the consequences could be dire. Suddenly, the dinner party and her signature dish seemed insignificant compared to the trouble she might be in. Swallowing her pride, Karen meekly retreated to the back of the line, her face burning with shame. As she waited, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises might be in store for her. One thing was certain. She had learned a valuable lesson of the dangers of entitlement. The line inched forward, and Karen's thoughts raced. How could this have happened? She was used to getting her way, no matter who stood in her path. But this time, her entitled behavior had backfired in the most humiliating way possible. As Karen waited, she couldn't help but steal glances at Judge Walters, who stood calmly behind her. The woman's posture was straight, her expression unreadable. Karen wondered what she was thinking, whether she was planning to follow through on her threat to file a complaint. The minutes ticked by, and Karen's anxiety only grew. What if this incident ended up on the evening news? What if it spread through the community and tarnished her reputation? She was a prominent member of the local PTA and an active volunteer at her church. The thought of her peers looking down on her made her stomach churn. Finally, it was Karen's turn to check out. As she unloaded her groceries onto the conveyor belt, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the cashier. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing judgment or disapproval in the young woman's expression. Once the transaction was complete, Karen quickly snatched her bags and hurried toward the exit. But as she reached for the door, a hand on her shoulder stopped her in her tracks. "Leaving so soon?" Judge Walters' voice was calm, but Karen could detect a hint of amusement in her tone. Karen turned around, her heart pounding. I need to get home. I have a dinner party, and—" "I'm sure your guests can wait a few minutes," the judge interrupted. "I'd like to have a word with you, if you don't mind." Karen's mind raced as she followed the judge to a quiet corner of the store. What could she possibly want? Was this the moment when the judge would announce her intentions to file a formal complaint? "Look, I'm really sorry about what happened back there," Karen blurted out, the words spilling from her lips. "I was in a hurry, and I just—" Judge Walters raised a hand, silencing her. "I understand you were in a rush, but that doesn't excuse your behavior. Cutting in line and threatening others is unacceptable, regardless of the circumstances." Karen swallowed hard, bracing herself for the worst. However, the judge continued, "I'm willing to let this incident slide on one condition." Karen's eyes widened. "Condition? What do you mean?" "I want you to volunteer at the local food bank for the next 3 weekends," Judge Walters said, her gaze unwavering. "It's important for people in positions of privilege to understand the struggles of those less fortunate. Perhaps that will give you a new perspective on the world." Karen was stunned. This wasn't the punishment she had been expecting. "But I have." "Your dinner party can wait," the judge interrupted. "This is non-negotiable. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to follow through on my threat to file a complaint. The choice is yours." Karen's mind raced as she considered her options. On one hand, the thought of volunteering at a food bank filled her with dread. It was far from the glamorous world she was used to. But on the other hand, the alternative, a formal complaint that could potentially ruin her reputation, was even worse. Reluctantly, Karen nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." Judge Walters smiled, a hint of satisfaction in her expression. "I'm glad we could come to an understanding. You can reach out to the food bank to schedule your shifts. And Karen?" She paused, her gaze narrowing. "Don't try to wriggle out of this. I'll be keeping an eye on you." With that, the judge turned and walked away, leaving Karen to ponder the weight of her decision. As she made her way to her car, Karen couldn't help but wonder what other surprises might be in store for her. One thing was certain: her life was about to take an unexpected turn. Karen stared at the imposing brick building, her stomach churning with dread. This was the local food bank, and it was the last place she wanted to be on a Saturday morning. But after her confrontation with Judge Walters, she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, Karen pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was bustling with activity. Volunteers were sorting and packing food donations, while a long line of patrons waited patiently to receive their weekly supplies. Karen hesitated, suddenly feeling out of place. This was a world she had always tried to avoid, one that was far removed from her comfortable suburban life. But now, she was about to be thrust into the midst of it, all because of her own entitled behavior. "Can I help you?" A kind-looking woman approached her, a warm smile on her face. Yes," Karen stammered. I'm here to volunteer. Judge Walters sent me." The woman's eyes widened with recognition. Yes, I was expecting you. Welcome. I'm Samantha, the volunteer coordinator. Follow me, and I'll get you set up." Karen trailed behind Samantha, her eyes darting around the bustling space. She couldn't help but feel like she was the odd one out, a privileged outsider in a world of hardship and struggle. Samantha led her to a small room filled with boxes and crates. "All right, your first task is to sort and repack these donations. We need to make sure everything is organized and ready for distribution." Karen stared at the boxes, her brow furrowing. "Sort and repack. But It's important work," Samantha interrupted, her tone firm but patient. "These donations help feed families in need. Why don't you get started and let me know if you have any questions?" With that, Samantha left the room, leaving Karen alone with the daunting task before her. Tentatively, she approached one of the boxes and began to sift through its contents: cans of beans, bags of rice, and boxes of cereal. As she worked, Karen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. This was so far removed from her usual routine, where she spent her days attending PTA meetings organizing charity galas, and sipping lattes with her fellow privileged friends. Suddenly, the sound of a child's cry pierced the air, and Karen looked up to see a young mother struggling to keep her toddler calm while waiting in line. The mother's face was weary, her eyes red-rimmed, and Karen felt a pang of guilt. It dawned on her then, the reality of the situation she had found herself in. These were real people, struggling to make ends meet, and here she was, a privileged outsider, forced to confront the harsh realities of their lives. As Karen continued to sort and repack the donations, her hands trembling, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises might be in store for her. One thing was certain. This experience was about to change her in ways she never could have imagined. The hours ticked by, and Karen found herself immersed in the rhythmic routine of sorting and repacking the donations. At first, the task seemed monotonous and daunting, but as she worked, she couldn't help but become more aware of the stories behind each item. A tattered can of beans, a slightly dented box of cereal. These weren't just inanimate objects, but symbols of the struggles faced by the families who relied on the food bank. Karen couldn't help but wonder about the people who would be receiving these donations. What were their lives like? What challenges did they face on a daily basis? As she repacked a crate of canned vegetables, Karen's gaze was drawn to a young mother who had just received her weekly allotment. The woman's face was etched with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes as she carefully loaded the bags into her car. Watching the interaction, Karen felt a pang of empathy, a feeling foreign to her privileged existence. She had always viewed the less fortunate as distant, abstract concepts, but now she was confronted with the human faces behind the statistics. Samantha, the volunteer coordinator, noticed Karen's pensive expression and approached her. "You're doing a great job," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. "I can tell this is new territory for you, but you're handling it well." Karen looked up, her eyes meeting Samantha's. It's harder than I thought," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha nodded, understanding dawning on her face. "I imagine it is. But that's the point, you know, to open your eyes to the realities of life for those who struggle." Karen swallowed hard, her gaze drifting back to the young mother as she drove away. "I never really thought about it before," she confessed. "I mean, I knew poverty existed, but I never really saw it, you know." Samantha placed a hand on Karen's shoulder, her touch gentle yet firm. "That's the thing about privilege. It can make us blind to the struggles of others. But sometimes we need a rude awakening to help us see the world more clearly." Karen nodded, her mind racing with a newfound sense of awareness. The work she was doing here, the people she was serving, it was all so far removed from her own comfortable existence. And yet, in a strange way, it was also deeply connected to it. As the day wore on, Karen found herself working with a renewed sense of purpose. She listened intently as the other volunteers shared stories of the families they served, and she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration for their dedication and resilience. By the time she finished her shift, Karen's perspective had shifted in ways she never could have imagined. She had been forced to confront her own entitlement, and in doing so, she had gained a newfound appreciation for the struggles of those less fortunate. As she drove home, Karen couldn't help but wonder what other surprises might be in store for her. One thing was certain. This experience was just the beginning of a transformative journey that would challenge her to see the world through a different lens. Over the next 2 weekends, Karen found herself returning to the food bank, her initial dread slowly giving way to a growing sense of purpose. As she worked alongside the other volunteers, sorting and packing donations, she couldn't help but become more attuned to the stories of the families they were serving. One afternoon, as Karen was stocking the shelves, a young mother approached her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much for all your hard work," the woman said, her voice trembling. "This food bank has been a lifeline for my family." Karen was taken aback by the woman's sincerity, and she found herself at a loss for words. I'm just glad I can help," she stammered, suddenly self-conscious of her own privileged background. The woman smiled, her gaze lingering for a moment before she turned and rejoined the line of patrons. As Karen watched her go, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, knowing that her own entitled behavior had almost cost this woman the vital assistance she so desperately needed. It was in moments like these that Karen's perspective began to shift. She had always taken her comfortable lifestyle for granted, never truly understanding the challenges faced by those less fortunate. But now, as she witnessed the resilience and gratitude of the food bank's patrons, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of humility and empathy. One day, as Karen was sorting through a crate of donated clothing, she stumbled upon a tattered pair of children's sneakers. The worn soles and faded colors were a stark reminder of the harsh realities these families faced, and Karen found herself overcome with emotion. Samantha, the volunteer coordinator, noticed Karen's distress and approached her. "I know it's not easy, seeing the real-world impact of poverty," she said, her voice gentle. "But it's important work, and you're making a difference." Karen looked up, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I never realized how much these people struggle. And it's all because of my own entitled behavior that I ended up here." Samantha nodded, her expression understanding. "That's the thing about privilege. It can blind us to the struggles of others. But it's not too late to change, to use your privilege to make a positive impact." Karen considered Samantha's words, her mind racing. She had always been so focused on maintaining her own comfortable lifestyle, never once considering the challenges faced by those less fortunate. But now, as she witnessed the resilience and gratitude of the food bank's patrons, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility. "What can I do?" Karen asked, her voice laced with determination. "I want to do more, to make a real difference." Samantha smiled, her eyes sparkling with approval. "That's the spirit. There's so much more we can do, both here at the food bank and in the wider community. Are you ready to get to work?" Karen nodded, her heart swelling with a newfound sense of purpose. She had been given a chance to redeem herself, to use her privilege for good, and as she rolled up her sleeves and dove back into the task at hand, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of excitement for the journey that lay ahead. As the weeks passed, Karen found herself immersed in the world of the food bank, her initial reluctance transforming into a deep sense of purpose and dedication. Gone were the days when she would breeze through the aisles of the supermarket, oblivious to the struggles of those around her. Now, Karen's eyes were open to the harsh realities of poverty, and she was determined to make a difference. She spent her weekends sorting and packing donations, listening intently to the stories of the families she was serving. She learned about the challenges they faced, the constant juggling of bills, the difficult decisions between putting food on the table or paying the rent. But it wasn't just the work at the food bank that was changing Karen. She found herself becoming more aware of the inequalities in her own community, the invisible barriers that kept so many people trapped in a cycle of poverty. She began to question the structures and systems that perpetuated this disparity, and she felt a growing sense of responsibility to use her privilege to advocate for change. One day, as Karen was helping to distribute the weekly food allotments, she noticed a familiar face in the line, the older woman from the supermarket, the one she had tried to cut in front of. Karen's heart sank as she recognized the woman, and she braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. But to her surprise, the woman's expression was not one of anger or resentment, but rather a warm, knowing smile. "Hello, Karen," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm glad to see you here." Karen was taken aback, her own sense of shame and guilt flooding her. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her eyes downcast. "I never should have tried to cut in front of you that day. It was wrong of me, and I'm sorry for my entitled behavior." The woman reached out and placed a hand on Karen's arm, her touch surprisingly comforting. "I appreciate your apology, Karen, and I'm glad to see that you've learned from this experience." Karen looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and relief. "How did you know it was me?" The woman chuckled. Let's just say I have a keen eye for recognizing entitled behavior. But I'm glad to see that you've come a long way since then. Karen nodded, her gaze drifting to the other patrons in the line. I'd never realized how much these families struggle. It's opened my eyes to a whole new world, one that I've been sheltered from for so long. The woman smiled, her expression filled with understanding. That's the thing about privilege. It can make us blind to the realities of those less fortunate. But it's not too late to change, to use that privilege to make a difference. Karen felt a surge of determination. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to do more, to use my voice and my resources to fight against the inequalities in our community. The woman nodded, her eyes sparkling with approval. That's the spirit, Karen. Keep up the good work, and don't be afraid to let your actions speak louder than your words. With that, the woman turned and rejoined the line, leaving Karen to ponder the weight of their conversation. As she watched the patrons receive their weekly allotments, Karen felt a newfound sense of purpose and resolve. She was no longer the entitled, privileged woman she had once been. Now she was a force for change, determined to use her privilege to make a difference in the lives of those less fortunate. In the weeks that followed, Karen's newfound sense of purpose only grew stronger. She continued to volunteer at the food bank, but her involvement didn't stop there. She began reaching out to local community organizations, seeking ways to become more involved in the fight against poverty and inequality. One day, while sorting through a crate of donated clothing, Karen stumbled upon a tattered, well-worn coat. As she carefully examined it, she couldn't help but wonder about the person who had once worn it, the stories it could tell, the hardships it had weathered. Inspiration struck, and Karen knew exactly what she needed to do. She approached Samantha, the volunteer coordinator, with a proposal to organize a winter coat drive for the families served by the food bank. Samantha's eyes widened in surprise, but her expression quickly shifted to one of approval. That's a wonderful idea, Karen. I know the families we serve will be grateful for the extra warmth this winter. With Samantha's support, Karen set to work, tapping into her extensive network of friends and colleagues to spread the word about the coat drive. She was determined to make a real impact, to show the community that she was serious about using her privilege to make a difference. The response was overwhelming. Within a matter of weeks, Karen had collected hundreds of coats, hats, and gloves, all in pristine condition and ready to be distributed to those in need. On the day of the drive, Karen stood alongside the other volunteers, watching as the patrons of the food bank selected their winter gear, their faces filled with gratitude and relief. As Karen observed the scene, she couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed since that fateful day at the supermarket. Gone was the entitled, self-absorbed woman she had once been, replaced by a person who was deeply attuned to the struggles of others and driven to make a positive impact. But Karen's journey of redemption didn't end there. She continued to volunteer at the food bank, and her involvement in the community only deepened. She began advocating for policy changes that would address the root causes of poverty, using her voice and her influence to push for greater social and economic justice. One day, as Karen was sorting through a crate of canned goods, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Turning around, she was surprised to find Judge Walters standing before her, a warm smile on her face. I heard about the wonderful work you've been doing, Karen, the judge said, her tone filled with genuine admiration. I'm proud of you for turning your life around and using your privilege to make a real difference. Karen felt a surge of pride and humility, her eyes filling with tears. It's all thanks to you, Judge Walters. If it weren't for your intervention that day, I might never have had this chance at redemption. The judge nodded, her expression solemn. We all have the capacity for change, Karen. The key is recognizing our flaws and being willing to do the hard work to overcome them. As Karen watched the judge walk away, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose and determination. She had come a long way, and she knew that her journey was far from over. But she was ready to embrace the challenges ahead, confident in her ability to use her privilege to make a positive impact on the world around her. As the months passed, Karen's dedication to the food bank and the broader community only continued to grow. She had become a fixture at the organization, her tireless efforts and boundless energy inspiring the other volunteers and patrons alike. But Karen's impact extended far beyond the walls of the food bank. She had begun using her influence and connections to advocate for systemic change, working with local politicians and policymakers to address the root causes of poverty and inequality. One day, as Karen was sorting through a crate of donated toys, she received a call from Judge Walters. The judge's voice was warm and congratulatory, and Karen couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and gratitude. "I just wanted to let you know that the complaint I filed against you has been officially dismissed," the judge said. "And more than that, I've been following your work in the community, and I'm truly impressed." Karen's heart raced, her mind racing with the implications of the judge's words. Dismissed? But how? I thought I was in serious trouble. The judge chuckled. "Well, let's just say I pulled a few strings. You see, Karen, I knew from the moment I met you that you had the potential to do great things. And it seems I was right." Karen felt a lump in her throat, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know what to say. This whole experience has changed me in ways I never could have imagined." "That's exactly what I hoped would happen," the judge replied. "You see, my job isn't just about handing down punishments. It's about helping people recognize their own capacity for growth and change." Karen nodded, her mind racing with the weight of the judge's words. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Now you continue to do the amazing work you've been doing," the judge replied, "and you inspire others to follow in your footsteps. Your journey has just begun, Karen, and I can't wait to see what you accomplish next." As the call ended, Karen stood there, her mind spinning with a whirlwind of emotions. She had come so far, from a privileged, entitled woman to a champion of social justice and community empowerment. And it was all because of a chance encounter with a judge who saw the potential in her. In the weeks and months that followed, Karen's reputation as a force for change only continued to grow. She organized more charity drives, lobbied for policy changes, and spoke passionately about the need for greater equity and inclusion in her community. And as she looked around at the bustling food bank, surrounded by the grateful faces of the families she had helped, Karen couldn't help but feel a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment. This was her legacy, the impact she had made on the world, and she knew that it was just the beginning. With a renewed sense of determination, Karen rolled up her sleeves and got back to work, her eyes fixed on the horizon and her heart filled with the promise of a brighter future.